Her hand brushed mine as she said, "I've always watched over you." I froze for a second, half because of the words, half because of the warmth lingering from her touch. The smell of coffee mixed with motor oil filled the garage, clashing oddly with the faint floral scent she always wore. I'd been leaning over the engine of a car that stubbornly refused to start, greasy hands and all, but the second she appeared, the world narrowed to the space between us. She smiled like she knew something I didn't, and maybe she did. That smile wasn't the polite kind you throw at a stranger. It was a slow, knowing curve that reached her eyes, the kind that made you pause mid-breath. I swallowed, trying not to let my heartbeat betray me. She was mid-40s, or maybe just hitting it. Not that it mattered. She had this effortless confidence, the kind that made her seem untouchable, yet every gesture had a softness, like she carried someone else's weight and refused to let them feel it. "Need a hand?" she asked, leaning slightly over the engine bay. Her hair fell in soft waves, catching the fluorescent lights above, and I realized I hadn't seen her move in the usual rushed way today. There was patience in the tilt of her head, in the quiet she brought into this otherwise cluttered, noisy space. I think I've got it," I stammered, though truthfully I didn't. My fingers shook slightly as I tightened a bolt, suddenly aware that she was watching. I kept stealing glances at her, but every time our eyes met, I quickly looked away. She caught me anyway. I knew she did. Her hand brushed mine, just a fraction, accidental, maybe, but enough to send a spark up my arm. She smiled again, a small quirk of the lips, and said that sentence I couldn't stop turning over in my head. "I've always watched over you." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask how, why, or what she meant, but the words stuck somewhere behind my teeth. Instead, I just nodded, trying to keep my focus on the engine, though the sound of it failing felt distant, almost unimportant. We worked side by side for a few more minutes, the air thick with something I couldn't name. She handed me a wrench without a word when mine slipped, her fingers brushing mine again. This time I let it linger slightly, longer than necessary, just enough to feel it. Her eyes caught mine, and I saw something there, a flicker of amusement, a hint of understanding, a trace of something I couldn't place. I wanted to ask about it, but I didn't. I didn't dare. She shifted, leaning back against the counter, crossing her arms, and watched me pretend I was entirely in control. She said something small about the torque or the alignment. I didn't catch the words, but the way she looked at me made it feel like an accusation and a compliment all at once. I felt exposed, like she could see the layers I usually hid from everyone. And maybe she could. When she finally walked toward the door to leave, I realized my hands were still gripping the wrench too tightly. She paused, half-turned, giving me a quick, sideways glance, and for a second I thought she might say more. But she didn't. She left with that quiet authority, leaving the lingering scent of her perfume, and something I couldn't name, behind. I sank back onto the stool, listening to the ticking of the engine as if it might tell me what just happened. My chest felt tight, and I realized I had been holding my breath. Her hand had brushed mine, and those words echoed louder than anything else in the garage. "I've always watched over you." And I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next time I saw her, the garage smelled less like oil and more like rain. She'd brought a car in for a minor repair, something routine, but she moved through the space like she owned it, confident in every step. I stayed a pace behind, offering tools, wiping my hands on a rag, careful not to crowd her. She didn't ask for help, not exactly, but I sensed she didn't mind me being there either. She lifted the hood with a practiced ease, then paused, running a hand through her hair, and I noticed the faint tremor at her wrist. A small thing, almost imperceptible, but enough for me to stop mid-step. Her usual aura of control faltered just slightly. She glanced at me, lips pressed in a thin line, and for a second, I thought she might ask me to leave. But she didn't. Instead, she exhaled slowly and said, "Could you check the fluid levels?" in that calm, measured tone that hid something heavier beneath. I leaned over the engine beside her, trying not to stare, though I noticed everything. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight curve of her shoulders as she bent, how her fingers worked with both strength and care. She had this rhythm, a quiet precision that drew me in, but it wasn't just the work, it was her. She moved like she was holding something back, like the walls around her heart were just strong enough to keep the world out, but not me. She caught me looking and gave a brief, almost shy smile, like she didn't mean to. And then she laughed, low and soft, at something I had said about a stubborn bolt. It was brief, fleeting, but the sound lingered, wrapping itself around my chest, making it hard to breathe normally. I wanted to hear it again, and yet I worried that wanting it would be too much. A pause fell between us. I watched her, noting the way her gaze flicked to the rain streaking the windows, the tension in her jaw. There was a quiet exhaustion in her, something she didn't voice but didn't hide completely either. And in that moment, I realized how little I actually knew about her. The confident woman who moved through life with such control. She had cracks, and I wanted to see them, gently, without breaking anything. She reached for a tool, and her hand brushed mine. My fingers froze, catching hers for just an instant longer than necessary. She didn't pull away immediately, just held it there, as if testing something, weighing a line she wasn't ready to cross. That small contact, so fleeting and casual, carried something heavy. A pull I couldn't name, forbidden yet magnetic. She cleared her throat, straightened, and finally said, "Thanks for helping." Her voice was soft, layered with unspoken things. I nodded, barely trusting myself to speak, and she gave that tiny, fleeting smile again before turning back to the engine. I stayed beside her, wrench in hand, heart quietly racing. The air between us had changed, charged, fragile, and impossibly close. And I knew, even as I glanced at her bent form, that this pull, this quiet gravity, would follow me long after the rain stopped. The rain had started again, drumming a steady rhythm against the garage skylight. The air smelled of wet asphalt and the faint tang of engine oil. I was wiping down a workbench when she appeared, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Steam curled between us, soft and fragrant. I took mine silently, our fingers brushing over the rim. It was just a touch, but my chest tightened as though the world had compressed into that single moment. We didn't speak at first. She leaned against the counter, eyes on the rain outside, and I felt an odd sense of waiting, as if she was holding something back but unsure whether to release it. Her usual confidence was there, but beneath it, a subtle vulnerability, the kind you only notice if you care enough to look. "I didn't realize it was still raining," she said quietly, voice low, almost to herself. I watched her hands cradle the mug, noticing the slight tremor in her fingers. Maybe the day had been long, or maybe something else weighed on her. I didn't ask. I just sat opposite, letting the silence stretch, letting it speak for both of us. And then it happened. A fleeting moment of recklessness. She laughed at something small I said, the sound warm and intimate, and I leaned a little closer. She tilted her head toward me, eyes catching mine, and for a second, I thought, just for a second, that she might lean in. I wanted to close the distance that had been stretching between us for weeks, but I hesitated. Her phone buzzed sharply on the counter, and she glanced at it with a frown. I glimpsed the name, a number I didn't recognize. She shook her head, muttered something about a friend needing help, and suddenly the spell was broken. The tension that had been so deliciously close dissipated, leaving me suddenly aware of the space I'd been aching to close. We drank the coffee in silence after that. My mind raced, trying to figure out what that fleeting spark had meant, trying not to let my longing show. She laughed again, softer this time, and I noticed how tired she looked. The faint crease between her brows, the subtle slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was watching. All the things she let slip when she thought she was alone, and I caught them all. I wanted to tell her something. Anything. But the words felt like an intrusion, a trespass. So I stayed quiet, pretending I was absorbed in the coffee, pretending that the storm outside had nothing to do with the storm inside. Then she reached for the mug again, her hand brushing mine. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and something unspoken passed between us. Dangerous, thrilling, and utterly fragile. I could almost feel her heartbeat, almost hear the question lingering in the air between us. And then she moved back, just slightly, clearing her throat. I should check on that call, she said, her tone brisk, professional, but the faint flush on her cheeks betrayed her composure. I watched her walk away, the unspoken energy still hanging like static between us. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to bridge the invisible distance, but I didn't. And that hesitation, half desire, half fear, left me sitting there, staring at an empty counter, imagining what might have happened if just 1 second had been different. We were alone in the workshop, late afternoon light fading into gray. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound, except for the occasional drip of water from the rain-soaked roof. I had been stacking tools, trying to keep busy, but every so often my eyes flicked to her. She stood near the counter, arms crossed, staring at the floor like she was searching for something she had lost years ago. Finally, she spoke, quiet but firm. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" Her words fell into the room like stones into still water. I froze, wrench in hand, unsure if she meant the work, or us, or the fragile tension that had been building between us for months. I swallowed. I think about it sometimes, I admitted, because I couldn't lie even if I tried. My voice sounded small, too fragile for the space we occupied. She didn't move. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting mine with an intensity one hadn't seen before. There was no teasing, no warmth, just raw, unfiltered curiosity mixed with fear. And in that moment, the air between us felt taut, ready to snap. "I don't know if this, whatever it is, makes sense," she continued, voice trembling just slightly. "It's like we're walking around in each other's lives, but we're not supposed to." And yet, she trailed off, biting her lower lip, and I realized she couldn't finish the thought without giving too much away. I stepped closer, hesitating mid-step, aware of every breath she took. Her hands twitched at her sides, not meeting mine, not asking for it, but I could see her longing anyway. I wanted to speak, to say something that might make this easier, but words felt clumsy, insufficient. Instead, I just let my presence answer for me. The silence stretched. I noticed the faint lines of fatigue beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed and relaxed like she was holding herself together with sheer willpower. Every little gesture spoke volumes. The small sway of her stance, the way her fingers brushed a spot on the counter, the tight exhale she couldn't quite hide. She was a fortress, and I was the one standing outside, watching, waiting for a crack. I can't keep pretending this is normal," she said finally, her voice breaking, almost swallowed by the emptiness of the workshop. "I can't just act like nothing's happening between us. Because it is." And her voice caught, stopped abruptly, and she turned away, shoulders trembling just enough for me to see. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but the right words didn't exist. So I stayed there, silent, letting the weight of her confession hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. She didn't look at me again, but I could feel her eyes on my back as I stacked the last tool. My chest tightened, every nerve alive with the gravity of the moment. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost as if speaking it aloud made it real. "I'm not sure I can do this, and I don't know if I even want to let go." I stood frozen, the words settling over me like a storm that had finally broken, leaving everything raw and bare. The garage smelled faintly of rain and old leather when she returned that evening, carrying a small, worn notebook. She didn't say anything at first, just set it down on the counter and traced the cover with a fingertip, slow, deliberate. I watched her, trying not to breathe too loudly, trying not to betray how much my heart was thrumming against my ribs. Finally, she looked at me, eyes softer than usual, almost vulnerable. "I don't usually talk about this," she murmured, voice low, uncertain. She flipped the notebook open, revealing pages filled with neat handwriting, dates, little sketches of someone I hadn't met. It's from a long time ago. Someone I lost." I nodded, unsure whether to speak or simply exist there with her. She leaned against the counter, fingers brushing the notebook absently. He was everything. And then he wasn't. I never really got over it. Maybe I never will. Some part of me still carries him around, like a weight I don't know how to set down. The words landed softly, but they hit me like a stone in water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood about her. She wasn't just the confident, composed woman who moved through life with ease. She was fragile in places she rarely let anyone see. And now I was standing there, witnessing it, uninvited but somehow permitted. I started, then stopped. What could I say? That I understood? That I could somehow take the place of someone she had loved and lost? That seemed impossible. Instead, I let my eyes linger on her hands, the way they fidgeted with the edge of the notebook, the subtle tension in her fingers. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that whatever ghost she carried, I could sit beside her, but the words felt too loud, too clumsy. She looked up at me, and for a moment, the room shrank to just the two of us, her breathing, mine, the quiet tap of rain against the roof. Then she spoke again, quieter, almost a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if I'm capable of starting over, or if I'll always carry him with me. I swallowed, feeling the gravity of her admission pull at something deep inside me. I wanted to reach for her hand, but instead, I rested it on the counter, close enough to bridge the space without crossing it. She noticed, I think, because her gaze flicked to my fingers, and for a heartbeat, the weight between us shifted. She closed the notebook gently, almost reverently, and slid it toward me. I don't usually show this to anyone, she said. There was no accusation, no request, just trust, fragile and profound. I felt it settle in my chest, heavy and bright all at once. I lifted my hand slightly, hovering just above hers, feeling the warmth in the air, the quiet pulse of the moment. She didn't pull away, and neither did I. The silence stretched, charged, intimate. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the room. Maybe some things aren't meant to be forgotten. Maybe that's what makes the next thing worth trying. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the weight of her words, her past, her unspoken longing, sink in, and I realized that everything between us had shifted. Irrevocably. The garage was quiet that evening, rain drumming softly against the windows, the faint smell of oil and wet concrete lingering. She was perched on the edge of a stool, notebook closed, fingers tracing the seam as if reading a hidden line between us. I stood a few feet away, wrench in hand, though it felt pointless. Everything that mattered had already been said in the silence, in the small confessions, in the moments we couldn't ignore. She looked up, eyes meeting mine without the usual guarded spark, just a quiet, steady gaze. I don't think we're pretending anymore, she said softly. No accusation, no question, just an acknowledgement that the fragile walls between us had finally shifted. I nodded, because there was no need for words beyond that. I stepped closer, careful not to intrude, and she didn't move away. There was a gravity now, a pull that made the air thick, charged, yet comfortable. It was the inevitability of something neither of us had rushed, but that had been building quietly, persistently, for months. We moved around the workbench together, side by side, our motions synchronized in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the tools we handled. Every glance, every brush of an elbow felt intentional, though no one had planned it. She laughed softly at something small, her hand brushing mine as she reached for a socket. I froze just slightly, letting the touch linger a fraction longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, suspended between the raindrops on the windows and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I wanted to speak, to try to capture this fragile equilibrium in words, but it felt unnecessary. Words had already failed us. This quiet understanding was enough. She shifted slightly on the stool, her shoulder brushing mine. It was accidental, maybe, but deliberate in the way it resonated through both of us. I let my hand hover near hers, fingertips brushing lightly, just enough to feel the warmth, the reality of her presence. Her eyes flicked down, then back to mine, and I thought I saw relief there, maybe even a little awe. We stayed like that, side by side, hands almost touching, breathing in the shared space that was ours alone. There was no rush, no expectation, only recognition that what had been simmering beneath the surface had finally settled into something real, something earned. She leaned back against the counter, and I leaned against the opposite edge, close enough that the warmth from her body reached me. The rain outside softened, the light fading into a gentle gray, and for the first time, I felt the weight of anticipation lift. No declarations, no grand gestures, just quiet, shared acknowledgement of what had been waiting all along. Finally, she let her hand rest lightly on mine. I didn't move it. She didn't move hers. Just that simple, unforced contact said more than anything words ever could. And as we sat together, hands touching, eyes occasionally meeting and drifting away, I realized that this quiet, imperfect, inevitable connection was enough. All of it. No promises, no labels. Just finality in the way the world felt right for the first time in months. I still think about that night in the garage sometimes. The way the rain had softened, the quiet hum of the lights overhead, the simple contact of her hand resting against mine. I don't think either of us said much after that. We didn't need to. The tension, the questions, the years of careful distance, all of it had folded into something quieter, something unspoken but undeniable. Looking back now, I realize how much it changed me. I learned to notice the small things, the way someone's fingers tremble when they're holding back, the tiny gestures that reveal more than words ever could. I learned that patience isn't just waiting. It's understanding. It's giving space for trust to grow without forcing it. She changed too, though maybe in ways I'll never fully see. She learned to let someone in, even if only a little at a time. She let her walls soften around me, just enough that I could feel the real weight behind her smiles, her laughter, the careful control she carried everywhere else. And in doing that, she reminded me that love isn't a single declaration. It's the accumulation of moments, of tiny acts, of choosing to stay present when the world insists on rushing past. We didn't have fireworks, grand gestures, or a perfect ending. What we had was human, messy, flawed, and entirely ours. And maybe that's why it matters. That quiet connection, the way we understood each other without words, the subtle charge in the air when our fingers brushed. It's what I carry with me now, like a light I can always return to. Sometimes I still catch myself replaying those evenings, remembering how she moved, how she spoke, how she let me see just enough of her that I felt honored and terrified all at once. And I smile, because I know we both came out different on the other side. Not broken, not idealized, just awake. The garage isn't just a place of work anymore. It's a place of memory, of lessons learned, of moments that reminded me that love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in the silence, in the gentle pull of a hand, in the quiet acknowledgement that someone has seen you, truly seen you, and stayed. I don't know what the future holds, and we never promise certainty. But I do know that the connection we built, fragile and slow as it was, shaped us both in ways we didn't expect. And there's something quietly beautiful about that. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?